Particularly for Ironmans, you have to have a plan. You have to have a vision. You have to also be flexible. And just like in business, where you might have the world's greatest marketing plan or business plan, but then there's the economy, and then there's inflation, and then there are events that happen you just can't account for. And the reason I think it's helped me so much in business is that marathons, Ironmans, you have to love the long game.
Hey there, Lead the Team Nation. Welcome back to another great episode. Today I have for you Joe King, who is Chief Marketing Officer over at WinWire. Joe has over 30 years of professional experience, and the last 25 in the professional services industry as CMO. He's been to India, check this out, more than 50 times, and started his career selling paper in New York City. And he's completed more than 30 marathons, 3 Ironman races, and hundreds of half marathons. And is it 70.3 Ironman? 70.3?
Well, first of all, good to be with you, Ben. And yes, so there are 2 Ironman distances. One is 70.3, and the other full Ironman is 140.6.
Okay. So 170.3 and 2 or 3 Ironman races. And
I've done 3 140.6 mile races. How about that?
Okay. I'm understanding the math here. Holy smokes. Well, we got to start there.
Sure.
Why and how did that all happen?
Good question. Well, first of all, it's 2.4 miles of swimming for those who don't know. You then transition onto the bike where you do 112 miles on the bike. And then if that's not enough, you run a full marathon, 26.2 miles.
Oof.
Why? I had started when my baseball aspirations to be a Major League Baseball player were dashed in high school. I gravitated to running. I was a skinny 140-pound soaking wet runner, went to marathons, did over 30 of those. And then it just got boring, Ben. And I needed something more challenging. And so met some friends in a triathlon club, and they said, you're like everyone else. You're going to be afraid to swim. But if you've done marathons, you can complete an Ironman. And it just brings me balance. And what I mean by that is when I start my day, like I did today, swimming a couple miles in a pool or running 8 to 10 miles before work, by the time I check email and I'm online and ready to go for the day, I've mentally prepared for that day and the challenges ahead, and it just puts me in the right mindset. So it does have a professional benefit.
Well, how in the world did you find out you had a knack for this? And because baseball is not an endurance sport.
No, it is
and here
not.
you are doing a marathon and 30 of them. I mean, I know people, I've not done a marathon, but I know people that have done, like their greatest accomplishment was maybe doing 2 or 3. And then you're clocking all these marathons. I mean, what are you putting your body through to do all this stuff?
You are putting your body through a lot, but I will tell you, and I tell this to people all the time, if 5Ks, 10Ks are your jam, do that. If that gets you that runner's high, if that gives you that feeling of accomplishment, you don't have to do a half marathon. You don't have to do a marathon or Ironman races, because it does beat up your body. What most people don't understand is that it really is maybe 20% physical and 80% mental. Most people, with, of course, extenuating circumstances if there's a physical limitation, but most people short of that can do it if they want to do it. But you got to want to do it, because the preparation, discipline, dedication, especially if you travel like I do for my job, looking up hotels that you're staying at and making sure that they have the proper equipment, making sure that your flight schedule gets you into a city in time to get that workout in before your business meetings or an event if you're attending, is super important. So there's a lot that goes into it, but most of it is mental.
All right. So the physical preparation, there's probably a litany, and I've had friends that do it. Like you do this many miles this day, and then that day you build, and you probably have your formula. What I'm more curious about right now, though, is what are you said running the marathon or Ironman is 80% mental. What are you doing to prepare your mind?
Yeah, there's a lot of visualization as you get ready for the race. You visualize from the moment you get up what you're eating, when you're eating, particularly for Ironmans. You have to have a plan. You have to have a vision. And it you have to also be flexible because that day, just like in business, there are going to be obstacles that you cannot predict. It could be the weather. You could wake up with a bug. You could have mechanical issues on a bike. And just like in business, where you might have the world's greatest marketing plan or business plan going into your next fiscal year, but then there's the economy, and then there's inflation, and then there are events that happen to your business, but also your customer's business when you're in professional services like us that you just can't account for when you put that plan together. So the flexibility, the adaptability is key. And the reason I think it's helped me so much in business is that marathons, Ironmans, you have to love the long game. You know, like in marketing or in sales, where I've also spent part of my career,
Yeah.
sales cycles are longer than we like. In my industry, they're 6 to 9 months long. So you have to embrace and like the long game. Or a marketing program, it doesn't usually yield the impact that you want it to in the first couple of months.
Yeah.
There's very much that long game mentality that you have to have with racing and training, like you do in business. And then, the grind. I mean, the race is almost the easy part, right? And you're only racing distances of that significance a couple times a year. So the day in and day out is a mental grind. You have to love the process. You have to embrace the suck. I hope I can say that, but that's really how you
can.
That's really how you have to approach it, because living on the East Coast on a February morning, when you get up and you look at your training plan and you've got a 8-mile run and it snowed the night before and it's -7-degree wind chill and you got to get outside and do it, you got to get outside and do it. So
yeah, I love that. So listeners, you can either run 30 marathons and do 3 Ironmans. Right, 3 Ironmans? Yeah, 3 Ironmans. You can either do 30 marathons and 3 Ironmans and hundreds of half marathons to learn this leadership lesson, or you can listen to Joe's interview. Your choice on what you want to do to accelerate your career.
I appreciate that. Well,
I vote listen to this interview with Joe.
You know, if I'm a Malcolm Gladwell fan, like most people are. And what does he say? 10,000 hours to become an expert at something?
Yeah.
I'm not a professional. I will never be a professional Ironman or marathoner, but I have put in my 10,000 hours. So I know a thing or two about it.
Yes, you have. Now, question for you in terms of what you're tracking, what tools you use. I mean, there's like the Apple Watch, there's Whoop, there's all kinds of different tracking devices for your health and biometrics and whatnot. I'm curious from that tools, and also if you listen to things as you're running and doing your training.
100% listen. I'm a big podcast listener when I am running. Not on the bike because that's not safe, but outside running when I have a long run on the weekends, usually I put on a couple podcasts, which can range from marketing related. There's an account-based marketing podcast I enjoy listening to, but I also try to tap into mental coaching and mental preparation. And there's a lot of really good material out there for that. In terms of
like what?
What's that?
You said there's different material for mindset preparation for that you're listening to, like podcast wise, or was it
Podcast
program?
wise, there was
What do you listen to?
so there was a mental coach who worked with a lot of famous athletes. His name was Trevor Moad. He tragically passed away about a year or two ago. He was probably most known for being the mental coach for Russell Wilson. But
Okay.
he wrote a series of books, and his one of his premises, which really I gravitated to, is also the name of one of his books, which was called Getting to Neutral.
Hmm.
And basically, he's like, hey, not every day is going to be apple pie, rainbows, and fireworks. A lot of days, your mindset is in a very negative place when you wake up or you enter a business meeting or you prepare to run 8 miles on a February morning. But don't try to focus on getting to that positive state. Just focus on getting to neutral. That might be enough. It's a less daunting task to go from negative to neutral than it is to go from negative to positive. And so he had a series of podcasts, which of course now are no longer. So that was one that jumps to mind that I used to listen to pretty religiously.
Yeah, I really like that Getting to Neutral. I haven't heard of the book, but I know through different coaches I've had from a meditation standpoint that neutrality is center.
Yep.
And instead of shifting from one, so as you say, maybe from maybe a darker or more negative mindset, I don't want to do this, to being excited about it seems almost impossible. And so the art of centering becomes just getting to that neutral state. I don't know what the book says about this, but I imagine it's sort of getting to central, and then you can choose where you're going to go from there.
Where you go from there. Absolutely. That's you nailed it. So you don't even have to read the book, but if you want to, I highly recommend it. It was put out probably 2 or 3 years ago, Getting to Neutral.
So talking about books, you've been mentioned in a couple of books by the co-founder of Mindtree.
Yes.
Pretty well-known business leader.
Subruto Bagchi.
Subruto Bagchi. Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome.
So the books are Go Kiss the World and The High Performance Entrepreneur. What did you learn from being mentored from Subruto?
Wow. I get emotional every time I talk about Subruto, and it's been a while since I've seen him. And he, in fact, lives half his year in California and half his year in India. So I'm hoping to see him very soon. But my journey with Subruto started back in 2000. I helped start a company called Mindtree, which today is LTI Mindtree. But I helped start Mindtree. We were an IT professional services company.
Yep.
He was a co-founder. He was the chief operating officer. And as you mentioned, he was a mentor. And I learned so much from him. The art of marketing, the art of, or the importance of culture over strategy when building a company. And just being a part of that as part of the founding team was just had a profound impact on my career. And in a lot of ways, I didn't realize it until after I left Mindtree 12 years later, the sort of impact he had. But along the way, he wrote a couple books, and these are books for entrepreneurs, and just talked about, his approach to building world-class next generation companies. And I was honored to be even mentioned in those books in terms of the impact I had on Mindtree.
What's one of the more memorable moments that you had with him?
With Mindtree?
Mindtree or Subruto, either one.
Yeah. Well, I'll start. You mentioned in your intro how I've been to India over 50 times, and I do need to add up all those stamps in my passport to confirm what the exact number is. But it is well over 50. I would go 3 or 4 times a year for board meetings. When I was with Mindtree and then later in my career, I continued to go. So my love affair with India goes back to even grad school, where I wrote a paper on General Motors needing to open an automotive plant in India because, this is mid-90s, of course, but I was like, there's so many people. They don't have an auto manufacturer in India. Why not it's a great market for a company like GM to replace all the rickshaws and all. Well, little did I know, you cram a billion plus people into a country the size of Texas. It's a little unrealistic to have cars as we know them here in the US.
Mm,
But anyway, I
interesting. Okay.
digress. India is just such a spiritual, wonderful
Hmm.
place. And, at the time, Sabruto was based in India, and I reported to him. So just all the
Hmm.
conversations we would have about life. He made it a point when he would come to the US to meet my family. We would go on sales calls together, and he would, say, if I wasn't here, how would you go to that meeting? And if the meeting was in New York City, and at the time I lived in New Jersey, I'd say, well, Sabruto, I'd take the train, then I'd get into Midtown Manhattan, and then we jump on a subway. And of course, this is before Uber. This is before.
Hmm.
And he's like, well, then that's what we're going to do. He
Hmm.
he was very unassuming. He was very curious. He was just wanting to walk a mile in the footsteps of me as a business leader in this country, trying to open new business with this unknown brand behind me, but also just curious and lifelong learner in terms of the business community here. His brand and the brand of Mindtree in India was instantaneously known from the
Hmm.
day we started the company, because Sabruto and some of the other co-founders came from Wipro, which is today
Yeah.
still one of the largest, most visible brands in India. But in the US, we were not known at all. And my job
Hmm.
as a marketer was to put the brand on the map and compete against the Wipros and the Infosys and the TCSs of the world. So just so many things come flooding back to my mind
Hmm.
when I think of my experience building a company, going to India, and working with him.
Yeah, so cool. I love that idea. And for those of you that don't know Mindtree, probably a lot of people do. They have a very well-known brand. And I think it's cool that you got to learn directly from one of the legends of industry, but that he didn't want to come over here and have the fancy black limo chauffeur cart him all over Manhattan, which
Exactly.
there's plenty of executives doing that. And I'm not knocking that. But it's
Yep.
different when you're like, hey, I need to understand. It's one thing to say, I need to understand what my customers do, but say, I need to understand what my team is doing in these countries because I need to be closer to the business. And you can get reports, you can have calls, you can have, all these meetings virtually, but there's nothing like just getting on the commute with them and
One
seeing
of
how
the
it goes.
things that agree with everything you said as you were talking, one of the things that Sabrito wrote about in his book was actually not about me. It was about my parents. And, they are one of the biggest sources of inspiration for me.
Hmm.
And Sabruto was fascinated by the fact that my father was a public school teacher in the Bronx back in the 70s and 80s. He retired in the early 90s and would commute, get up at 4:30 in the morning. He would drive across the George Washington Bridge into the South Bronx, and he would teach K through 8 math. And he would
Hmm.
teach it to kids that had a challenge learning. So, not an easy job description for anybody. Certainly, he was a minority going into the South Bronx as a teacher. But Sabruto was fascinated
Hmm.
by this being an exemplary example of servant leadership, which is something that Sabruto felt very passionate about. Empowering, inspiring, developing students, leaders of tomorrow above
Hmm.
yourself. And, you know, Ben, when I first started my career, like most of us, we would scratch and claw. We'd want to get to the C-suite, room at the table, at the board table. And as you go on in your career, at least this is my experience, you realize that that's not necessarily what life's mission should be. And
Hmm.
I feel I have grown into this servant leadership style with my teams
Hmm.
in the second half of my career. And, it's a lot of it I attribute to my parents and the upbringing I had and the example that my father set commuting into the city every day.
Yeah. Wow. So cool. My dad was a public school teacher and eventually became principal superintendent. My mom was a public school teacher. And I love teaching. I try to incorporate it in what I do, but I feel like teaching is one of the most noble professions out there.
100%. I've taught at Moravian University, which is here in Bethlehem, PA, where I've lived. I've taught classes at William Patterson. I agree, and somewhere down the road, I will get back to
Yeah.
maybe doing that more full time than part time.
When you say servant leadership, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's listening intently, not judging. It's asking and not necessarily telling people what to do. It's serving and supporting your team, empowering your team versus, demanding or expecting that something be done a certain way. It's leading by example instead of leaning on whatever title you have on a business card. It's
Hmm.
those approaches to working with your team instead of having the mindset that they work for you and they exist to make you look good. I no longer care about looking good. I'm more interested in getting the job done in this um, team oriented manner and culture. So those are probably more traits than anything else, but it's empowering, it's inspiring, and it's developing your team and putting them before yourself.
Yeah, it's big. It's it's quite a mindset shift than the more comfortable and sometimes more traditional. I'm going to tell you what to do because I know what's happening. And I'm curious at WinWire Technologies how this translates because in researching the company unleashes the power of Azure and OpenAI. I
Yeah.
mean, those things are changing at the speed of light, and it probably
Yep.
already changed while we were on in this interview.
You're
And here you
probably
guys
right.
are putting yourself in the middle of that for your customers, right? They hire, am I right that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but they hire you guys to help them make sense of these technologies and help them utilize it for their business, right?
You're
Is
100%
that,
right. Are you going after my job here? You did
yeah,
a
I'm
really
coming for
nice
you,
job
but I
for
can't,
someone.
I'm not running any marathons. So forget that.
Either that or our branding and our messaging is on point because you you
Yeah.
you you really kind of
Good
nailed it. I
marketing.
mean, we have WinWire has what we like to say is unmatched experience in the Microsoft technology stack. So everything related to
Yeah.
Azure and the Microsoft technologies to help our healthcare and life sciences companies basically transform their business. And I do think we do it in this servant leadership way. We
Hmm.
want them to look good. We want them to be successful. And our role in doing that is one of enabling them. And like you said, technology changes come at the speed of light, and they really
Hmm.
hire us, whether it's a data problem, a Gen AI problem, something with cloud, app, modern work modernization. They're really hiring us to be able to peer around the corner and let them know what those changes are and how it's going to impact their business.
Well, so what are you doing to keep your learning edge? Because you, in that role, you said peer around the corner, you need to be ahead of your clients, right? You need to be able to be up to speed, be in the conversation because they can't, because they're, I guess, busy running their business. So what is your routine? What is your way to maintain that?
It's staying laser focused and trying not to go a mile wide and an inch deep, but rather the other way around. It's really this laser
Hmm.
focused on everything having to do with Microsoft technology. And it's the partnership that we have with Microsoft, whether that translates into certifying our teams in India to be certified on the latest technologies, whether it's our management team, leadership team here in the US working with our counterparts at Microsoft to understand product roadmaps, understand, what's next in that
Yep.
product release that we need to be aware of. And it's a combination of those two things so that, whether it's a team in India that's building the solution for the client, or whether it's our team here in the US conceptualizing what that solution might look like with our clients, there's a heavy dependency on the partnership with Microsoft, which is second to none for
Yeah.
us.
Because they're putting the technology out. So you've got to be so close to that. You got to know what's coming. And now there's, obviously they're in with Chat GPT, OpenAI, all these companies now who
Copilot, just out at a conference the other day. I mean, everyone wants to
nuts.
know about custom Copilot development and how it can help us all look and behave more smartly. And it's coming at you at the speed of light. It's almost impossible for anyone running a business like our clients to not only run that business, but keep up on the technology. So that's our job.
It's good. There's going to be a ride, my friend. And we're already on it. What starting to wind this up? What's the time you had an unexpected twist or failure in your career, and how did it lead to your success or growth on down the road?
Well, I've had a lot of things that didn't go the way that they were planned to go. The one that always sticks out for me, Ben, when I think of that is early days of Mindtree. You're old enough, I'm sure, to have heard about the dot-com bust.
Yeah.
And of course, 9/11 kind of mixed in there tragically, but I think the NASDAQ went down from 78% from, early 2000 to late 22, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, 9/11 tragically happened in there. We weren't even a $10 million company. And basically overnight, Sabruto, going back to my mentor, said to me, "You no longer have a marketing budget." And my reply to him was, "I know. How can I add impact to our company and keep it afloat during this time?" And I got involved in a project that I wouldn't have ever guessed that I would have gotten involved in. And that was working with our head of people function, more traditionally known as HR. And we were about to roll out our PCMM, which is People Capability Maturity Model. There's a similar one for software maturity, which most people are familiar with. They're both programs orchestrated by Carnegie Mellon, because we basically said we need to double down on our human capital and how we develop and retain talent, because that's what our industry is. We don't have a product. It's all professional services. And so I'm like, let me know how I can help. And so literally for a couple of years, I worked under the guidance of our head of HR globally in India and helped put this program in place. Our goal was to reach PCMM level 5, which was optimized, the most mature model attainment that you can get. And happy to say that a few years later, we got that. And of course, things turned around. I returned to marketing and we lived happily ever after.
Wow.
So turned around, what was an unfortunate situation for not just me, for the company and for every company that was in business at that time, and tried to turn it into a positive.
I love that. Talking about servant leadership, you have no budget, and instead of whining and complaining, you said, "Okay, I know." And then you said, "How can I be of service? How can I help?" And he's like, "Well, HR needs help." And I don't know, you might have had some grumblings in the back of your brain, but you're like, okay.
Of course I did. Of course I did.
So Bruno, no. But I mean, I also think on a different level, applying marketing to HR is powerful, because the people that don't get marketed to are the internal employees, and they're the ones you got to market to, right? The future of the business, the possibilities, all these things. And a lot of times people turn off their sales and marketing brain when they're talking inside the company. and they just want to reserve it for the outside. But there's so much power, right? And thinking internally.
Completely agree. Not just internally, but the way we define and look at the employer brand is internal, right? You've attracted, now you need to retain that talent.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then what about future talent? Because today, even WinWire, we're a small, medium-sized business, which, by the way, we've been in business for 17 years. Most companies fail before their 10-year anniversary or their 10-year birthday. I think it's about 70%. So the fact that we're in business for 17 years tells me we're doing something right. But we are competing against Accenture, IBM, Mindtree, Wipro, Infosys, TCS. These are companies that are much bigger than
it's
ours.
It's like a bar brawl out there, competitive wise. Yeah.
100%. And it's all for human capital. So the employer brand and marketing to the employer brand, internally and externally, is almost as important to marketing to the CIOs of large enterprise companies, which is the other part of my job.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, we could keep going, but we got to wrap this sucker up here. It's been a fun one, Joe. What's your parting thought for our listeners today? Take it any direction you want to.
I'm going to go back to my teaching, Ben.
Let's hear it.
My son is 24 years old, so he's just entered the workforce. My daughter just graduated as well. She's taking a gap year and working full time before she goes for her master's. And they'll ask me, Dad, when you were my age, what were you thinking? What do you wish you would have known that you don't know today?
That means they're not teenagers if they're asking that question. A teenager would probably ask that.
You're exactly right.
So my teenager.
I always tell them, just follow your passion. You're going to be working for a really long time. And don't rush into a career, into a job, unless you feel like you are following your passion. And then the other piece of advice I give them, and it's so simple, but yet so challenging, I think, for a lot of people, is just be kind. Be kind in every interaction that you can. I'll give you one last story if you have time for it.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
I received, so about 12 years ago, I was at a company and I was hiring for a fairly senior marketing role. And this woman was more than qualified, but it was a tight battle and I decided to go with someone else. And so I called her and I explained why this wasn't an exact match for her, why we were going in another direction. Thought nothing of it. Never a fun conversation, but I moved on. Do you know, a couple months ago, out of the blue, I received a LinkedIn message from her. She is now this co-founder of a learning platform, AI-generated learning platform called GRPHR, just to give her a plug. And she's like, it's been a hot minute since we spoke. You probably don't even remember talking to me, but she reminded me that she interviewed for this job. And she said, you could have just sent me an email like everyone else did, kind of that standard rejection letter. She goes, but you didn't. And I appreciate that because it wasn't the right fit for me. And she said, I just wanted to let you know the reason I'm reaching out today is my brother had 3 job offers in India. One was from WinWire and the others were from competitors. And when he told me that one was WinWire, I remember that you were there because I follow you on LinkedIn. And she said, go work there. Even though it's not a marketing role, go work there. And he's been with us for 2 or 3 months. So he just checked in with her the other day. I said, how's he doing? She's like, he's on his 2nd project and he loves it. So be kind. You never know when that's going to kind of come back and pay dividends.
Man, I love that. It's comeback. It's comeback karma.
Pay it forward.
Pay it forward. What a great note to wind up on, Joe. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Ben. Pleasure.